Right, so I just finished reading Snow Country by Yasunari Kawabata. It was pretty good. So Yasunari Kawabata is really famous, won a Nobel Prize in 1968 for writing Snow Country. And so basically, I went in with high expectations, obviously, and I've got to say, I think I was left impressed. Although I have to admit, I think Snow Country is not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Like I think Snow Country is going to be sort of one of the more divisive books that I've reviewed. Like last time I reviewed like Things Fall Apart. I reviewed. Oh, I mean, they all kind of starting to blend together. But oh, and the Picture of Dorian Gray. I think those are things that are pretty well received universally nowadays, at least. But I think with this novel, the main thing about it is that the book's incredibly sparse. As in, Kawabata basically doesn't directly tell you anything about the plot. Like he says, look, there is a plot, right? Like there is a plot. It's not wrong. It's not right to say that there is no plot, but there's just nothing in the sense that there's like these beats, right? This happens, this happens, this happens. It kind of all meshes and blends together into these kind of experiences that repeat and these like haiku-esque kind of descriptions of nature and just the landscape that sort of give you this vibe of where he is and what the story is kind of about. But it's kind of hard when you finish it and you say, "Oh well, what happened in the book?" And you think, "Oh well, I don't really know." Like but I'll try to explain. I'll try to do my best to explain some of the plot. So basically, it follows. So the main character Shimamura and the two female protagonists are Yoko and Komiko. So Shimamura is this wealthy. He's a bit of a like a self-imposed title. Like he's like an intellectual. What he likes is he's obsessed with the Occidental arts. Particularly, he likes studying Western dance and I think ballet. Although he doesn't like the idea of seeing it in person, which is strange because that would make it too real. He also belittles Japan's own culture, even though that's the only one he's actually seen. So he's just this kind of he's up on his high horse, and he basically just thinks because he's wealthy. It's mentioned that he inherited all his money, so he's just a rich boy going around flaunting his wealth and you know just having fun. He's also married at the start of the novel and has children. So what happens is he takes this train and he goes to the Japanese countryside, which is the Japan's eastern sea, yeah, on the eastern seaboard, which is the part of the world I think that gets the most snow. Probably because I think it's just the mix of it being an island and of it being an island and it also being cold. Because I think in places like like Siberia, it's probably more cold, but they don't get as much rain. It's not as humid. Anyways, so the novel begins. It's permeated. The whole book's permeated by the snowy mountains and the cedar trees, which constantly mentioned. How they like sort of sit upon the landscape. And while Shigemura is on the train to the snow country, he sees this girl sitting diagonal from the sky. Yes, and it turns out it's Yoko and it's Yukio. And he spies on her in the reflection of the fogged up glass until the image of her and the snowy landscape merge together and harmonize into the singular entity of mysterious beauty for Shimamura. And he becomes basically he sort of becomes obsessed with this girl in a kind of weird way. Like when the train finishes and they get off, they basically he hears her talk to the train. Talk to the train conductor, and he thinks he's like, wow, that's a beautiful voice. And so she kind of stays in his mind, and then and then he moves on. So what happens is he goes off and he goes to a spa and meets this geisha who's Komiko. And it's strange because I think apparently what happens is so what he does is he basically asks directly right after he goes in, he asks for Komiko, the geisha, to fetch another geisha, which apparently I think is strange in tradition. I don't know. I'm not Japanese. Um, and so yeah, so and he basically he's just like he asked like, "Can you get me a geisha?" She's like, "Well, that's a bit rude. Like, why you? You've just seen me. I'm here, and it's also like daytime. This is not really like geisha hour." And he's like, "No, no, no. I want a geisha. Give me a geisha." And so what happens is she's like after a bunch of back and forth, she eventually gets him one, and then he sees her and he's like, "Nah, actually, I don't like this." Nah. And then so he doesn't actually end up doing anything with her, and that kind of shows sort of Shimura's kind of personality, where he does these things and he does like based on the kind of thought and the like intellectual kind of. He doesn't like following through. He just hates the idea of actually doing things. It's really weird. He's just this really reluctant kind of, like it's kind of shown by his affair. He's sort of unwilling to accept the fact that he's having an adulterous affair with Komiko while having a family. He lives in this liminal space in between of kind of accepting and not accepting that he's cheating on his wife, and that because he's spending so much time with Komiko, so he's also kind of cheating on her with his family. Although it's weird, and so basically, so what happens after is so after it sort of kind of blends together. What happens is Tomoko and Summer meet a lot of times. They talk about her life. They talk about, and they make love. Lots of parts. It's just him waking up, and it's just about um like what's it? Komoko getting drunk, like really really drunk, going all red, and then she like just goes to find Shiomura in his room, and then I think they like do it. Although again, Yasunari Kawabata never mentions that they do it, and not a single time really. Like does he directly mention? Oh, they like he just sort of skirts around things. He has Shimamura kind of looking at her face the whole time. He's like looking at how red she is, and this is this kind of romantic thing, but it's also so sparse and so lonely. And so, what happens after is so Komiko is revealed to have a relationship with Yukio, so the man on the train, and he becomes this kind of central figure where she basically Komiko takes care of him, and Yoko also takes care of him. Yeah, she also takes care of him, and so they like have this kind of sisterly relationship, but it also is kind of shown that they both kind of like Yukio. It's really weird. It's unclear the whole time. And an elderly masseuse that Shimamura finds tells him that Komoko and Yukio were supposed to be married, but then Shimamura asks Yukio, and she tells him that that's not true. And it's lots of these kind of contradicting, conflicting things in the novel that make it sometimes a bit confusing to read. Although, again, the book plays out. It reads very beautifully. The writing is really good. If you treat it like you're reading like a haiku or like a poem, you read like reading lyric, then it makes a lot more sense because it doesn't really make sense in the sense of that kind of realist, that like 20th century kind of literary realism like novel, like that kind of Portrait of a Lady, like Middlemarch type of, da-dum, 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 this like this beat, this beat, this beat, like it doesn't play out that way. It just kind of happens. It kind of exists. And so what happens is basically um, Yukio, after they do all this, got this back and forth, Shimura says he has to go home, to his family, obviously. And what's that? Komiko sends him off. Then basically afterwards, what happens is Yoko comes up to Komiko and she says, Yukio is basically he's on his deathbed. He's about to go, and she has this moment of hesitation, which I'm still unclear about. And I think this is for, I think I need time. Like time needs to settle before I think I might finally understand. But Komiko refuses to go back to him, even though he's on his deathbed. And Yuko's incredibly worried. And she's like, no, 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 I'm going to send Shimamura. Although she also, at the same time, is kind of, and Shimamura is like, no, 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 go to him. But she's like, no, 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 I'm staying. I don't want to go. So it's a bit strange. Eventually, Yukio comes back, and this is part two. So then Yukio, this is part one, and Yukio comes back, and it's clear that things have changed a lot. He comes back. I think it's like a year or two later. Komiko's life has changed. She, I think, works at a little store. Her where she lives changed. She still does the geisha stuff, but things have changed a lot. Yoko becomes devastated by the death. She constantly spends her time at the grave of Yukio, while Komiko kind of is unfazed. Although at the same time, when they bring up Yukio, she's also very hesitant to talk about him, and she continues getting intoxicated, going to parties. And so there's this part in the part two where it's really significant, which is a part where, and this is sort of the thing that's mentioned in like the introduction and the preface of the book that I read, which is he sleeps with Komiko, and while they're sleeping, originally he calls her good girl. She's drunk, he's drunk. They both had a bunch of what's the I was about to have sake. Yeah, exactly. I was going to say soju, but it's sake. So they both have sake, and they're both drunk, and he's like, "Oh, good girl," because I don't know why. I guess this is romantic. And then it changes after they do it. He says "good woman." He calls her "good woman" instead of "good girl." And then Komiko realizes that she's been used, and that his perception of her has this whole time has truly been sort of you know of kind of an object, an adulterous woman. He doesn't really see her as that pure innocent girl. He sort of sees her as this woman that he just kind of releases the sexual kind of energy with, right? And so that's kind of a significant part. It's just very subtle, right? It's lots of the subtle stuff. And I likely haven't even caught most of the stuff that's in the novel because it's this type of subtle stuff that you just sort of don't miss unless you don't get unless someone explains it to you. And so finally at the end of the novel, what happens is that this kind of goes on. So afterwards, they have this kind of life, and then Shiramura eventually has to go. And before he goes, he travels the countryside. He goes around seeing the snow, blah, blah, blah. When he comes back, he sees Komiko. He's on a taxi. He sees Komiko. And she's like, what are you doing without me? Like, you're not going to tell me you're going to leave? And she gets in the car until a fire breaks out. Everyone rushes to the fire. And, everyone's worried until they realize all the children have been saved. All the children, they're throwing them into the snow. They're putting out the fire. The firemen are, and then it turns out that Yoko falls from the building. And again, it's at this point it's unclear whether she's dead or alive. But at the moment of falling, Yoko sort of once again becomes the sort of she becomes part of the landscape. Like Kilmer focuses on how she sort of falls so slowly. Like it's a moment that kind of stretches out, and she falls horizontally. He focuses on that, and again, she sort of becomes again like an object of fascination for her, and she becomes part of this landscape. And then Komiko realizes it, and then she rushes off to her. And throughout this whole time, there's also been this dynamic where Yoko doesn't really like Komiko. The two don't really like each other because they sort of both had a relationship with Yukio, and they were also both sort of cheating with Shimamura. It's really weird. And then Shimamura is like really cold and indifferent to all this. And and at the end, you're sort of left with this kind of drab feeling of just kind of confusion, but also kind of hollowness because it's not really a kind of satisfying ending. Again, it's just like sort of, it's like reading a haiku that doesn't finish. It's really beautiful, but it's got all these beautiful moments, but it also just kind of leaves this weird feel. It's got this weird taste in your mouth that you just can't get rid of. So, if I, look, this wouldn't be my first recommendation. I can see why it won a Nobel Prize, but I'll be honest, it wouldn't like it's not like a book like under like Thousand Years of Solitude or something where I would like oh what's 100 Years of Solitude? I like recommend like drop of a hat, yeah, go read this. I'd say oh well like would you like this kind of stuff like this kind of sparse, empty, unresolving stuff? If you like that kind of stuff, yeah, like go for it. I think it's a good. I thought it was a great novel. I really enjoyed it. I would read it again in the future. But and I think it's probably got good rereadability. But that's that. So yeah, um, yeah, cool. See it. Hit that like button and subscribe.